I am Emmanuel Egbunu, and by the grace of God, I serve as the Anglican Bishop of the Diocese of Lokoja in Nigeria. Lokoja is in a little bit of Nigeria as it is structured today. And I usually say, when people hold up a map of Nigeria, they'll see two main rivers almost going across Nigeria. Now, there's a point where the two rivers meet at a confluence. That's where Lokoja is. And I will say more about that later. But yes, I have been bishop in Lokoja now for about 16 years, and I had a chance to serve for 10 years as Archbishop of that province. But I have had an abiding interest in scholarship, not just for its own sake, but to make our faith relevant in our context. For far too long, people have seen Christianity as being foreign to Africa, and so you find that people who are talking about a revival of culture will tell you that no, let's go back to our indigenous traditional religion. And I am concerned that we must make sense of Christianity. Yes, it had to come through missionaries, Western missionaries, but we do need to own it and express it in a way that is not alien to African environment. I am committed to that. So in my work as a bishop, I want to be able to let people know that we are not second-class citizens. We are not very much the kind of situation that Paul had to address with the Gentiles and the Jews, sort of. So I just have tried to say, look, let's get into scholarship. Let's make sense of it and see its relevance. Yes, so that has taken me into that world, even if it's a tiptoe. I started with literature, and you will see how that also formed my attitude. Because as one who was reading literature, we came to comparative literature. That's my first degree, and we were talking about decolonizing literature. So you were not just reading Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, and all the English literary figures and the big poets. But we needed to also understand that the only kind of literature there was not English literature. So we needed to look at literature in Africa. Even though written in English, it was rooted in the African experience, so we call it literature in English. And if you looked at South Africa, they were addressing issues that were of concern to them, protest against racism. And so if you went to what we now call African American, they were also doing that. The Caribbean, poets like Derek Walcott. So finding that even in literature, people were trying to root their understanding and to decolonize it. I saw that almost every discipline, we need to make sense of that. So I carried that over into my study of church history, to know not just what others have said about us, but how we have understood it and how we have expressed it. So yes, the first, I did a master's degree in post-African church history, and this made me focus on what is called Calvary Ministries, CAPRO. Why did I do that? Most of the mission agencies we had seen, there was CMS and all the other ones. But this was an initiative of young people, fresh graduates, but it was essentially by Africans. This was Nigerian youth. So yes, over time, they got some ideas. They needed to collaborate with and network with other mission agencies, YWAM and others that have done it. But that this was an initiative of young people, young graduates, feeling a need to evangelize. So I did my work on Calvary Ministries because it was an indigenous initiative. And I always want to explore the fact that Africa has come of age and it is not a second-hand thing. We can't own it as a first-hand thing. So going into my doctoral research, I felt, okay, fine. Let's go back to where it all started, our encounter. Yes, the CMS brought Christianity to us. So that's what took me. It wasn't just to get a degree, but to see how all of this could make sense in my understanding of Christianity and passing it on to others. Yeah.
Sure. Let me take you back a bit. You have talked about comparative literature.
Yeah.
Studying decolonizing language or something like that.
Yeah.
Would you remember one or two books that you found helpful at that level, at that time?
There was Chinua Achebe, who wrote Things Fall Apart.
Sure.
And he was talking about how the encounter of the traditional setting with Christianity divided the society, really, because there were those who had to leave what they once believed to embrace the new thing. So, like he says, things fall apart, and he was quoting from the poet, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. So it was like a disintegration of the society. There are others. It was a common theme then. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, who wrote Weep Not Child and a number of other things, The River Between, Petals of Blood, Devil on the Cross. There is the struggle for independence, for instance, captured by Kenneth Kaunda, Zambia Shall Be Free. There is also Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country. Mm-hmm. And then if you go into the Caribbean, Derek Walcott, like I talked about, was a poet, and then there are other novelists in the African American setting. But there was the need for people to have an authentic voice of their own. I could go to poets too, like Christopher Okebo, David Diop, and a number of others like that. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we're doing history here, and I think the mention of these names, the mention of these books, needs to be done so that our listeners, especially the younger generation of Africans, continue to be aware of where we are coming from as a people, why we actually talk about decolonizing languages, decolonizing church history, as you're doing in your thesis.
Yes, and indeed, I mean, to just root some of what they did to within the political struggles for identity. Like, for instance, there was this thing about the negritude in French literature. So all of that was an attempt to find their voice without making an apology.
Sure. That's helpful. Thank you so much for saying that. Let's go back to your PhD now. It comes out of Jos. What did you explore, and why did you choose to explore that question?
Right. Thank you. For quite some time, like I said, I had been interested in this whole issue of contextualizing faith, decolonizing, and some would call it enculturation. So while pursuing all of that, and helping people to know that you are not latecomers, you are not second-hand citizens as far as Christianity is concerned, I became Bishop of Lokoja, which has been known to be the gateway of Christianity to northern Nigeria. And again, northern Nigeria have been understood erroneously by many people to be essentially Islamic. So again, going back to the roots where it all started, you hear people say that in Nigeria, the north is mostly Islam and the south is Christian or traditional African religion. And so I found that coming to Lokoja and seeing the society itself and how people related. Here was a place where there were Christians, there were Muslims, and there were traditional religionists side by side. And so I wanted to see how did this community evolve from what you call a polyglot to a situation where they could relate. And as we were hearing of religious crises and riots, we found that this was a place where in the same family you had Christians and Muslims, and they called themselves brothers and they related. And I just wanted to get to the root of that. So I went there I began to just dig into how it all started. And something that makes Lokoja particularly interesting, not just the missionary encounter, but there were at least 3 levels of foreign influences there. There were the commercial agents, I would say, those who came not because they were Christian, they simply wanted legitimate trade. And, the Lander brothers who had come in October 1830 and had, said that they had discovered the Niger. And I find that very funny. You are discovering something that had always been there. So, but they talked about some of the potentials that were there to open it up really for trade. And so the first expedition was, strictly speaking, a commercial endeavor. And so we had these commercial interests, and then we had the missionaries who took advantage of that and came along on the team to also introduce Christianity along with other things. But then came, after the scramble for Africa, came the colonialists. And so suddenly finding 3 levels of foreigners, as it were, people couldn't differentiate between the interests. Every white person had, as far as they were concerned, the same purpose. So the missionary was seen as one who came to exploit, either commercially or he sided with the colonialists. So I was concerned that we should delineate the different interests and influences, and to even show that at some point there were conflicts among these groups. So it's more like an apologetic of some sort to defend. The missionary didn't do everything 100% right. Sometimes they allow themselves to be carried away by racial sentiments. But that is not the big picture, and that's not all the story. So I was concerned to the essence of mission, the missionary enterprise in a place like that, which now became the gateway to the north. And from what I said earlier, that the two rivers met there, those were the only, or rather the most popular pathway then. There weren't railways at that time. So if people had to travel by sea, and this was a confluence of two big rivers, it was only natural that Christianity came from the south, Badagry, Abeokuta, and then to the east, Onitsha, of course, coming around Boni, and then up to Lokoja, which is right in the middle, and then began to go to the other northern.
You have referred to the two rivers quite a lot. Can we mention their names?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They are today known as the River Niger,
okay,
and Benue, even though at the initial times, some of the older documents will call them the Sada River and Kora.
So which one is Niger?
Okay, the Niger was the Sada,
okay.
Tshad, and then the Kora is the Benue. So if you see some of the older historical records, they would call them by those names.
Are these names still existent somewhere in common language today, or they are gone?
Some have suggested that the Kora River, or the name Kora, has gave rise to what we call Kwara State today. I have not changed that up, but they are not in popular use anymore today.
All right, that's helpful. When you started talking about your research, you said something in passing, and I think it's critical that I follow that up. You talked about contextualizing,
yeah,
decolonizing,
yeah,
and enculturation in one sentence. Does that reflect how you think about this, that contextualization would actually involve decolonizing Christianity?
Definitely I do, because in the historical experience that I have explored, we found a situation where in the early stages, to be a good Christian meant imbibing certain Western lifestyle, and people couldn't quite differentiate between culture, the cultural baggage, and the faith itself. Of course, the faith will always come in a garb. I'll give an example. So, for instance, people would go for baptism converts will be baptized, and they would have names that are quite meaningful in their native language, and nothing pagan about it, but the priests in those days would expect you to, if you were going to come for baptism, those names needed to be changed to more befitting names. And by being more befitting, they were not just referring only to names in the Bible, which were Jewish names anyway, but also names like Jones and Robert and Landry's, and and you found people bearing names, to show that they were really converts. And this had nothing. So the more meaningful names in their culture had to be discarded to show that they were now truly converted. We also have instances of weddings, for instance. There were attires that you could use for wedding. Very beautiful native dresses, but by the time this came, you had to be dressed in suit and wedding gowns, and one could go on and on. So I think contextualization means being able to say, yes, some things in our culture are unchristian and should be discarded, but not everything needs to be discarded. There's this saying about, you could throw away the baby with the bath water. The things in our setting that needed to be retained and possibly Christianized. There was nothing wrong with them. In those initial stages too, even in the church gatherings of the new believers, you had to sing hymns that were composed from churches in the West. And I do like poetry, and I like the poetry of hymns. But also, and the instruments were things like the organ. And here where people come from a background of being used to percussion instruments, drums, and other kinds of instruments that they were used to. And the missionaries sometimes dismiss these things as being fetish because they had been used in the shrines. That was all they knew. Now, could they sing Christian songs with those kind of instruments? I think it was around the Abeokuta area that Ajayi Crowther and some of the missionaries actually allowed the converts to use some of the instruments. Of course, that has changed over time. And now you can have drums and other flutes and instruments that were used in shrines before that can be used in the church to worship the living God without being necessarily engaging in fetish practices. So I think that if we must contextualize, a good amount of decolonizing has to be done.
I agree with you on that one. I love this work. I love the fact that as you've said, the African church is coming of age now, and it has to be able to have its own identity, and think through issues in its own African ways. So yes, we cannot contextualize without decolonizing.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about your research process, research methods, and whatever you did to get your data.
Well, yeah. At that level of doctoral research, it was important to not just rely on secondary sources, because in every secondary source, good as they are the interpretation of somebody else. And I wanted to take a fresh look at some of the things that were on ground. So it was important for me to access the original sources as much as possible. Already in that setting in Lokoja, so many things had become merely just oral tradition. People who had lived and had seen certain things, and they would tell you the names of some missionaries and what they did. That's what you are hearing from the people who are very old. What you read from the book, which is the account, journals, some of the missionary missionaries, is one thing. So you found that for the same event, you had different perspectives. And what I wanted to do was to say, yes, the missionary journals and accounts are accurate, but they are from a subjective perspective. And you needed to also hear the interpretation of the person you were writing about. If, for instance, a New Yam festival, it is his way of saying we're thanking God, or whatever represented God. Now, when the missionary sees it and he interprets it differently, it gives a different picture. There's a very beautiful work that has been done to recover that setting. Something done by Professor Femi Kolako in Canada. He transcribed the journals of one of the native agents who worked on the Niger at this Confluence area. And of course, it is written in poor English, but you could see nuances. You could see his way of understanding some of these things in a different way. It gives you a richer understanding. I show in my research the primary sources, and of course in historiography you need to do that. Go to the source, and that took me to archives that were dedicated, like the CMS archive at the Cadbury collection of the University of Birmingham. I went there a few times to actually see some of the things that were recorded and written. And because I lived there and I understand what the people were saying, I could say much of the missionary account is accurate. The interpretation was flawed because I have access to what I would say a more accurate interpretation. This is why the people did it, not just this is what they did, but this is why they did it. And it's important because if you just base your reaction, and anthropologists will say better about this, we just base your reaction on what the people did without understanding what it meant to them, then a great part of the meaning is lost. I'll tell you some of the effect of this. There were some times when some people were prepared for confirmation, and they memorized all that they were to memorize, the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, in a language that was not necessarily their own, but the foreign missionary didn't know that was not their native language, just the common language that they memorized it, they knew everything, they could just say it without the meaning of what it was. And so I really wanted to go to the source. And besides going to the CMS archives, I now went to the Northern National Archives in Nigeria to now see how the same situation reported by the CMS Missionary was reported, in the National Archives, or indeed the same situation reported by the CMS Missionary and the account of the colonial administrator in the same setting. Of course, I placed a lot of emphasis on access to the material, and that remains my focus to say, let's get it, let's reinterpret it in the light of better understanding of the bigger picture, so that history is not based on a subjective interpretation, but on a more holistic understanding.
Can you give an example of an event or something that's interpreted differently by the missionaries or the colonial agents and the local people? Just one example.
Right. There's a place around Lokoja called the Aurora Community, where the converts, the Christian converts, felt that they should go to worship on Sunday, and the community felt that it was not right to teach them. And so what they tried to do, some of these converts, was to go out in the morning wearing their farm clothing, dirty clothing, as if going to the farm, and then put their Sunday clothes in a bag. And by the time they'd gone some distance, they now brought out their Sunday clothing to go and use. Now, when you see the account in the National Archives, while the Christians saw it as persecution, the colonialists, the colonial administrators, saw it differently, and that happened a few times. Here were the converts paying money to church as part of their offerings, and the colonial administrator expected them to also pay tax. And the missionaries felt that no, this was double obligation, as it were. Where if they're already paying in the church, the colonial master said no, that they are paying to the church does not excuse them from doing what they were supposed to do to the state. There are quite a number of, so many things are coming to my mind at this time, but it was commonplace that, the missionaries would see it one way, the colonialists or the indigenous people will see it the other way.
So, this is historiography. Yeah. What came out as your research findings?
Oh, right. One is the fact that Christianity could exist with its own identity as something that by the time you go through the different phases, it was growing to understand and to have an identity of its own. And so it wasn't just a foreign religion, it was God's message for mankind. Secondly, is the fact that Christianity provided the basic foundation for Western education, because people were trained regardless of their faith. Once they were part of the community, the school was established and everybody was welcome. And as they came and people were educated, children of the Christian converts sat in school side by side with Muslim children. Indeed, in Lokoja right now, the traditional ruler, even though he's required to be a Muslim, has a lot of respect for the Christian, the Anglican Church, because according to him, the very first traditional ruler for Lokoja was somebody recommended by Bishop Ajayi Crowther. Yes. And he actually was a Christian convert, one of those who came back from Sierra Leone, and he was recommended as somebody who could take care of the community. Of course, by the setting then in northern Nigeria, you couldn't be a traditional ruler without subscribing to the caliphate. So he was required to convert. But at that point of his enthronement, Crowther was there as a witness. Until today, not only the present traditional ruler, a former pupil of a school set up by the CMS, and he says he was a choir boy. And so when I go there, he will tell me so many things. But he still says that a traditional ruler cannot be enthroned in that community without the presence of an Anglican priest.
Really?
Yes. And so you find that even though there has been crisis, religious crisis, all over parts of the north, in Lokoja community, that has been difficult, because if you are going to do that, it means that family members will just will harm themselves. So you see that. So Western education was a great thing that came and prepared people to become the leaders in various sectors. Later, another research finding is the fact that the legacies of the CMS, like health institutions, became, as it were, the pathway for other medical institutions coming in to that setting. Other influences came into that area, but definitely I have been able to show in my research that even though there were commercial agents and there were colonialists, the missionaries had a clear agenda, and they were not there to exploit. They were there to help. And all over the place, you can see the fruit of what they had put in place. Most notably is this Western education that has raised a whole generation of people who are saying there's no way they can raise their hand against a Christian, even if they themselves are not converts, because they owe so much to the Christian faith. Yeah.
Is CMS still active in Lokoja?
Well, the face has changed. Of course, as you know, CMS metamorphosed into the Anglican Church. And so, to that extent, yes. Indeed, there are many people who, if the best way you can get them to understand the Anglican Church, you just say CMS. And they say, oh, now we understand that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Brilliant. You have gone through this. You've been a bishop for 14 years, 16 years, or something like that.
Yeah.
But you've gone through this. You've gone with your academic journey to a PhD. How would you speak to younger generations of African Christians thinking about studying theology, thinking about possibly leadership role in the church? From your experience, what words can you pass on to the younger generation of Africans?
Well, thank you. It is important that we capture a distinct African Christian identity. I know there have been about African theology, African Christian theology, and people have written, our Shutter has written, Kwesi Dixon has written, BT and Bobby and Bediako. All of these people have written. So the matter of identity is still a major thing. I'm glad that after quite a while, we came to have the African Bible commentary. But one of the things that bothered me for a long time, and still bothers me to a good extent, is the fact that I keep asking myself, what contribution do we have to make? In the early 90s, for instance, I was in the UK and was part of a course that was mainly focused on hermeneutics, expository preaching. And whenever we came to class, on almost every course we're doing, we're given a reading list. And one question that was always on my mind was, where are the African scholars? Is it that the only people who have something to say about Christianity, about Bible books, are these authors from the West? Where are we? What do we have to say? Aren't there people who have studied the biblical languages or who can provide insight? So I was glad to see the African Bible commentary come out, even if belatedly. But more and more, I'm not looking at it in terms of decolonization now, but I look forward to African contribution to enriching Christianity, because when you look at a lot of things, there's probably greater affinity between the African and Jewish culture than the Jewish and Western culture. And I want us to bring out the richness of this and help the African to understand that you can be a Christian, and there's a lot that we need to rediscover about our understanding of God, which will in turn enrich our understanding of Christianity. There are the entire value system, and African worldview has a lot to contribute. And it seems to me that for a number of reasons, we have not come to full bloom yet. And I really look forward to seeing that happen. It's not a competition, but I do believe that there can be wholesomeness about what we bring to the table, which others can benefit from. A lot of our theological institutions now, seminaries, are beginning to rethink their curriculum, because apparently some of the so-called core courses that came from the Western worldview are having to be replaced with more relevant and more relevant curriculum that can relate with the setting. So, younger generation, I would say, what your member in the church, I'm speaking as a bishop and as a pastor, yes, what your member wants to understand is not all the theories and the philosophies of Immanuel Kant and all of the rest of them, but how does this faith relate to me in my situation, in my struggles, in my underdevelopment? I think that is it. And we must let people know that Christianity itself and the ministry of Jesus was rooted in an essentially pleasant community. More and more work should be done. Bring our contributions to the table. And I would love to see more work being done, more authors coming out, publishing, so that people can be enlightened. Yes, not every community in Africa, especially the rural communities, not all of them are able to not all of them are able to relate with these things, but surely there are those that can. I'll give an example. Once I was visiting one of our rural churches, and they had prepared a program to welcome the bishop, and there were very beautiful hymns selected. And then when I got there, with all the way they beat their drums to welcome me, and then into the church, into the sanctuary, the building. And then we got there. The same people who were dancing joyfully in their own way suddenly now said, okay, we are starting this service. Let us sing hymn this and this. As a poet myself, the hymn was beautiful. But I looked at the people and I said, no. They are struggling to even pronounce the words and to understand and the beauty and the random. So I stopped it and I said, can you choose your own locally composed hymn that express your faith? It was amazing how the entire atmosphere changed.
Yeah.
And so more and more we do need to, our brothers who have gone further along the distance can help us. But I don't think it's a matter of some are superior to others, but let us see how we come together, bring to the table what we have to enrich Christianity.
Thank you. That was really powerful. So, final question. I do ask everybody that I talk to in these settings, can you name 2 or 3 African theologians, African Christian thought leaders that have helped shape you become who you are today?
I can think of some Ghanaian. The first that comes to mind is a man by the name Kwesi Dixon, Ghanaian, and I particularly liked his writing, and it was very helpful for me. And then somebody that I came to respect very, very strongly is Kwame Bediako. His writings have been really great. Another person who you will not call strictly speaking a theologian, who exerted a major impact on our understanding of Christianity is Lamin Sani. Lamin Sani's writings have cleared the fog in a lot of ways. I have the privilege to meet him and to do a few things together with him. And so I think that he is somebody who's been very, very helpful. At the Nigerian end, we do have Biancato. There is Cornelius Olowola. There is Wambuta. He took a course in African theology. He's late now. He was trying to develop what he called Savannah theology, but it's all along the line of talking about African decolonizing theology.
Who is this? I don't think I've ever heard that name.
Oh, okay. It's called Wambutta.
Okay.
Wambutta. I've forgotten his first name just now.
Okay.
Yeah. But Wambutta. Then, of course, in my Anglican setting, there is John Mbiti, Kenyan, and then, of course, Pobi, again, another Ghanaian. We have a few others in the Nigerian setting. There is Dapo Ashaju, who has been rector of our seminary, and is actually the bishop theologian in Nigeria now. Well, naturally, I would think more of church historians. Yes. There is Godwin Tassier, there's Ogbo Kalu, and one who is not an African, but who has contributed so much is Professor Andrew Walls, a man who has helped to just help us to look at things differently. Other church historians include Ade Ajayi, who wrote he wrote one of the first major works on Christian missions in Nigeria. Again, I'm glad him to have worked on some committees with him, and a number of bishops who have been church historians themselves. I can mention a number of them.
I mean, that's a long list. Thank you so much. On the one hand, you have stayed with the literature, so and that shows, and that's something that again speaks to the younger generation of Africans. Read African theology. You can't keep on reading European or North American theology forever. We got to find our own resources somewhat and find African thought leaders to listen to. Is there anything else that you'd want to speak to the church, the African church, especially the academic aspect of the African church?
Right. I am concerned that the church should be able to provide a model of leadership that is an improvement on the general picture in Africa. I'm not saying that yet. The political leadership in Africa has been largely responsible for Africa's underdevelopment. And the church has not developed a respectable alternative. And it is important that the church in Africa should be able to come up with a biblical model of Christian leadership that can inspire politicians who go into politics to go with a sense of purpose, and that the African society can feel that the church is not just another institution, but has something to offer that is hopeful.
Thank you. That's a fair critique, and I hope the church listens. The continent, in so many ways, seems to be worse than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
50 years ago, and yet it's full of Christians, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
50-60% of Africa's population is Christian.
Yeah.
And yet the most Christian places are the ones that are seeing the most difficult political situations.
Exactly.
So yeah, the church has to think itself into a new way of doing things that will show leadership that can speak to the nations, really. All right, thank you, Bishop.
Well, I hope you find some of what I've said helpful. Thank you.
Helpful. It is really helpful. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Thank you.
You have a good day. God bless.